Hello, welcome again to Fairtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm Steve Hayes.
and we are the Fairtax
FAIRtax.
Guys. Where's your scrolling banner, Scarborough?
This right here.
Oh, there you go. You didn't pick it.
Well, I couldn't remember when we do the three shot. I couldn't remember when I was supposed to bring it up. For those of you on audio only, Bob and I bring these props in. One is a scrolling banner, and the other is this giant Rubik's cube. I think Bob Paxton got that back in 1968, and he's
Uh,
got it worked out right. Yeah.
I've had it for a while, but the 11 by 11 Rubik's Cube, which I affectionately call Fat Albert, is what we use to demonstrate not only the complexity, but also the ever-changing nature of the tax code. I mean, it just never stays the same. And this one's it's not any harder to put back than a regular one. It just takes longer because there's more pieces. But let us acknowledge our guest sitting here ignoring you, Steve. Steve Hayes, National President of the Americans for Fair Taxation, is with us again. We have him on a fairly regular basis here on Fairtax Power Radio. Thank you again for taking time to talk to us today, sir.
It's always my pleasure. I enjoy it. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to put you right to work here. Now, we are actually, getting a little bit of ahead on our recording schedule. So this episode is going to stream a couple of weeks after we're recording it. So by the time it does hit the air, the Big Beautiful Bill will have been law for several weeks now. And
Right.
Steve, I just want to get your take on what's in that thing that people might not know about relative to taxation and what this kind of means for us in the fair tax movement.
Well, let me take the first one, the last one first, because I think it's important. One of the problems that's always inherent in tax reform is that so many people in DC think, well, we've done it for 3 or 4 years. There's no
Yeah,
reason to look at other types of reform.
yeah, we're
And
finished with this subject, ready to move on to something else.
yeah, let's do something else. We got rid of this one and whatever. But the problem you have for these people that are saying that, who are primarily beneficiaries of the tax code, whether they be members of Congress, lobbyists, or whatever, they are ignoring the fact that this president has said repeatedly how much he dislikes the income tax, how much he would like to get rid of it. He's talked about replacing it with tariffs. He's got a Secretary of the Treasury who's now on record saying we need to get rid of the income tax. He's got a Secretary of Commerce, Rutnick, saying we need to get rid of the income tax. So despite what Congress would like to do, my belief is that what the president's going to try to do is start moving toward hearings, information, education primarily to the American people about ways to get rid of the income tax. And that's what I'm really hoping for. If you look at all of the rhetoric that's going around in the news, 90% of it points out the air quotes flaws in the big bad beautiful bill. It is, they call it the big bad beautiful bill, not the big beautiful bill. And the reason is because they look at different parts of it, which are not just tax related. There's stuff on the border, there's stuff in all kinds of immigration provisions, money
Yeah,
for enforcement.
it's almost 1,000 pages long, so there's a
Right.
lot of stuff in there.
And they threw a lot of stuff in, you know, like the gamblers can't deduct all their losses. I mean, minutia type things that, well, minutia to me perhaps, but not to a gambler, I guess. But the point is, and it reminds me of that old story, a tax law change that benefits you is fine, but if it benefits somebody else, it's a bad loophole. And, so obviously it doesn't harm me in terms of the gambling losses, but some people it does. But I always go back to Lincoln's statement, if you want to get rid of a bad law, you enforce it strictly. And that's the way he felt about slavery. That's why he felt about the, uh, you know, Fugitive Slave Act. You have to enforce it to show how bad it is. And basically, when you've got a new commissioner who was a co-sponsor of the FAIRtax in the IRS, new commissioner, for all of his terms in Congress, and who is not a fan of IRS practices. And you've got combine that with a president and a cabinet that's really not fans of the income tax. You've got a situation where most of the provisions that are lauded as being great, like Grover Norquist is now saying you need to revise the bill to only tax capital gains after benchmarking them for inflation. In other words, if your property went up in value through inflation 20% and the overall value went up another 20%, you only tax the 20% that's not inflation. Well, that's pretty logical, but boy, is he getting a lot of pushback from people that are saying, oh, that's terrible because most people don't have capital gains.
Yeah.
Well,
I take it you have seen what Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to do with capital gains.
I'm not sure the last thing. She's always got ideas. What is her last proposal?
The last one I heard is, we've heard the no tax on tips, the no tax on
Right.
overtime, no tax on Social Security. Marjorie Taylor Greene has introduced a bill. I've seen it. Looking up our Congress.gov segment we'll look at next week to eliminate capital gains tax on the sale of your home.
Right. I saw that. Sorry. I thought maybe there was a new one because she has all sorts of different things. Now, she is a fan of the fair tax.
Yeah, she was a co-sponsor last Congress.
Yep.
She has not signed on again this
I,
time. We need to get her name on the line there.
yep. Jim Duffy's working on her, and I think she will come on. But primarily, a lot of these people stopped everything they were doing because of the Big Beautiful Bill. I mean, the orders from the White House were you don't do anything except this. You don't focus on anything except this. Get this done. So I think that's a big thing, but all of the provisions in the bill, let me go back. In the 70s, I would have spent 50 hours reading the bill. Why? Because I made money off the tax code.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been looking at how do I use these provisions to allow my clients to take better deductions and find those tax benefits, which were really loopholes. Okay. Find those and get them through. Now I look at it, I read it over, and I shake my head because all of this drama is so unnecessary. The right tax on capital gains is zero. The right tax on income, overtime, tips of any kind is zero. And you can't escape that by saying we've made it a little bit better because you're still punishing production. You're still punishing savings. You're still punishing investment. And I get so tired of reading these people that say, oh, we need to get the corporate rate down to 15%. No, we need to get it down to zero.
Well, there's the other side that wants to raise it up to 40.
Oh, and that's look at all the drama the fair tax eliminates.
Mm-hmm.
All of the angst that these guys go through. Let them be fighting over how to make the country more secure. Let them be fighting over how to improve the failing education system. Let them be discussing how to improve the infrastructure in this country, which is crumbling in many respects. Let them do things that are really beneficial to us instead of spending hundreds of thousands of hours cumulatively, maybe more, working on something that they call it, in air quotes again, permanent, but permanent in the tax code means until there's a new president or until he has to negotiate for something that he wants to get Democrat support, that he agrees to change that. And some of that happened in this tax code. He agreed to things that he would never have agreed to because he needed to get some votes from some Republicans, like SALT. He has spoken out against state and local tax deduction repeatedly. Why? Because states like New York subsidize their higher taxes by letting their residents write off the high taxes on their federal taxes, which means that all of us on the call and all of us listening are subsidizing it. Trump pushed for and got a $10,000 limit. In order to get his bill passed, though, he had to give up to $40,000. So there's give and take. So there's nothing permanent about this, except it, to me, addresses the need to look at a total elimination of the income tax, a total replacement of the system with the fair tax. And the thing that I think all of us need to be looking at is we need to be promoting and pushing with all of our elected representatives. Hey, are you in favor of getting rid of the income tax? I don't care if they're Democrats.
Oh, yeah.
Are you in favor of eliminating the need for the Internal Revenue Service?
Regardless, I just to your comment there, Democrat Republican, it's a nonpartisan issue. The
Right.
cliff that we're getting ready to fall off of fiscally is a cliff for everybody. It's an all-inclusive, giant gaping hole of debt that we are not going to be able to, as a country, recover from, because pretty soon, if not already, we're interest on that debt is a considerable amount of money, and we look at the interest that we pay on our mortgage, our credit card, the car we just bought. We know that the bill that just passed and President Trump signed looks at some of those interest deductions that helps us out, but it always tends to go back to the income side of things. The letter points to income, and so we're sitting here going $37 trillion. Plus we added, people have a knee-jerk reaction. Of course, you talked about it a minute ago, the politics of making a bill and getting it through both houses of Congress and then to the president to sign is an absolute mess. It's like walking into the hot dog factory. We have an opportunity here to take that pressure off of from the income side of taxation to the consumption side, and it opens up a whole new avenue, a whole new revenue source, that being those folks that aren't paying taxes right now, whether it be international travelers or the usual ones that we talk about. I want to ask you a question, Steve. As we go through and we say and we're getting ready to we're in, if not already, the summer break, our representatives are going to be home. What do we say to them? What let our listeners know what would be a good process? Because a lot of us are, we're out there working. We would love to have a set of a process that we could go to our representative and say, can you, will you, why won't you support a tax on consumption through HR 25?
Well, one of the things we have to know, and I've already found this out because I tried to get a meeting with a representative, is that they have no interest in talking about anything to do with taxes. Okay, no interest at all. regardless of that Quantus Insights poll that showed a majority of people favor getting rid of the income tax, and that a lot of them are Democrats, majority of Democrats and
Yep.
independents as well. And the fact that
A majority of a small majority, but a majority of
it's still a
Democrats
majority.
favored getting rid of the income tax. Yes,
Right.
that was rather surprising.
It was, well, it was and it wasn't. It's like the Democrats are seeing their cost of living spiral just like Republicans are. They're seeing the problems with the income tax. And I think one of the problems in dealing with the representative is that they don't want to talk about tax reform, Bob. They played that record, they've seen that movie, they're exhausted by it, and they don't want to talk about it. So what I think really makes sense is we don't talk about, quote, reform. We just use that poll and say, you know, I know you're tired of talking about taxes, but this is really interesting that a majority across the board and a high majority of younger people want to get rid of the income tax. And wouldn't that be great if you didn't have to go through this ever again?
Indeed. Let me ask you: do you think we could get somebody like John Fetterman aboard on the fair tax movement?
I think it's possible. He's a bit, let's just say, he fluctuates a lot in terms of where he goes. And I don't know that we could get him on board with the fair tax, but I have a strong feeling that he could get on board with eliminating the income tax.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so after, let's just say, and we're using Fetterman because Senator Fetterman is a Democrat, and he seems to have a clear vision of some things that are happening in Washington right now, or at least has made the comments to such. Do we, because we know that there's this pushback in DC about changing anything that upsets cash flow. And something of this nature, moving from income to consumption, is definitely going to sideswipe the cash flow mechanism in Washington without doubt. The survey that was just released a while back had an interesting question. Have you heard of the fair tax? And this is to the public. We do know that everybody would like to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service. I mean, who wouldn't? But a lot of people then answer their own question, says, yeah, but how are we going to do that? Oh, well, we can't do that. It's just not going to happen. And then they go about whatever they were doing before. But the question that was asked in the recent survey that we've been talking about, have you heard of the fair tax, HR 25? A larger number of all age demographics, starting at age 45 to 64, 60% plus have not heard of the fair tax.
Right.
The younger people, as you said just a minute ago, from 18 to 44, there's two components in that, are anywhere from 49% for 18 to 29, and 46% of 13 to 44-year-olds have not heard. And some are unsure. How do we move John Fetterman in Congress, who probably knows about the fair tax, but for whatever reason, no one seems to want to talk about it, as you said a minute ago? How do we get these young people and folks that are even in our age and older to say, I need to? It truly is a grassroots effort still. We're not mainstream like we'd like to be. How do we do that? Again, not necessarily thinking about our representatives at this point, but other people and friends and folks that we see in the street. How do we do that?
Well, I think the way to go about it, and I know it sounds a little bit like heresy for fair tax people, but I think is to adopt some of the techniques used by Soros and others, where you make a statement that isn't the entire statement. and you say to your friend, wouldn't it be great to get rid of the income tax in the IRS? Now you're going to have, I'm guessing, Bob, because I doubt you're associating with a lot of people who would say no. I suspect that most of your friends at church, your friends in business would say, oh, that would be a great idea. Or do you agree with President Trump that it's time to get rid of the income tax? Okay. Without necessarily saying, unless they come back and ask, but what would you replace it with? And the answer I would give would be a combination of, tariffs and consumption taxes. And then they say, well, how would that work? Well, one way it would work is to do a consumption tax, which is described, by the way, in a very thoroughly researched bill called the FAIRtax. And sort of lead them along, because 80% of the people we talk to, at least I'm finding this to be the case, after they tell you they want to get rid of the income tax, that's a great idea, or the IRS, that's a great idea, start asking about what are you going to do for your summer vacation? I mean, that's the end of the conversation. There have been a few people that come up or respond back to me, well, yes, I would, but what would you replace it with? In other words, rather than try to bite the whole thing in one bite, take smaller bites at it and start to get agreement. Because I think the survey showed us, the poll, that the majority of people want to get rid of the income tax. Yeah. Well, if you get rid of the income tax, Bob, and the IRS, what kind of tax can you have?
Okay, I've got a question for you based on that. We see the benefits coming out of the bill that was just signed into law, some taking place in the 2026 year, not much in the tax year that we're in now. People are going to start, as we're getting into the heat of the midterm elections, and you know how politics is. They're going to take the pulse of what's happening right now and what's happening 6 to 10 months from now. As we move into the heat of the midterm elections, when we talk to our representatives now, or when we're speaking with people who may be considering a run at a particular office, how do we say? And I know you said a minute ago that they don't want to talk about it. How do you get around that? We don't want to talk about it, avoidance, and say, hey, this is something that can help you become a front runner, specifically when it comes to that precipice of national debt that we see hanging in front of us. And again, it's a nonpartisan issue. The debt is the debt, regardless of whether you believe one side of the political persuasion or the other. So how do we talk to our people that are currently in office, the incumbents, and then people that might be challenging them in the fall of next year?
Well, I think, and this was the approach that I was trying to use if I get this meeting, is that, look, President Trump, Secretary Bessent, Secretary Rutnick have all thrown out the idea of getting rid of the income tax. But we found it very interesting that this Qantas Insight poll says that most of America agrees with it. And here are the results. And you look at all the demographics and you see that you've got a lot of people that agree with this. Don't you think that we should start really looking at this idea seriously?
Yeah, well,
and that's all.
To circle back to a second what you were talking about, that so many people that have not heard of the fair tax, I am firmly of the belief that the reason the number that people have heard of the fair tax is so low is because the media for decades has just ignored it.
Right.
I mean, they've not taken it seriously. And I know that as soon as we finish with this recording session, you've got a TV interview scheduled.
Right.
Do we see the media finally coming around and at least acknowledging the fair tax as a possible alternative in the grand debate over what do we do with our tax system?
A little bit. Okay, a little bit. But primarily, they're going to, in my opinion, oppose the idea, just like Fox News, we were told, had a boycott on the fair tax. I was on one time on Fox Business and
Hmm.
mentioned the fair tax, and the guy really enjoyed it. Stuart Varney said, we need to get you back. I'll have my producer contact you to do a longer show on this. No way of contact. After about 2 weeks, I tried to contact the producer who gave me the cell phone number. No response. So,
Huh.
so you've had an embargo at a lot of these media outlets on this. You've had, and I believe it's because the deep state isn't just blue. You've got a red deep state as well. You've got a group of people who really don't want to change anything that gives them control. And a lot of people believe that the income tax, like federal regulation, gives them a buffer against competition. And
Hmm.
the worse it can become, the more that Bob Scarborough has to work on regulation and taxes, the less he can do things to compete with other stations that are controlled by the big gurus out there.
So
And
maybe we
so
should be talking to the Joe Rogans of the world.
I think we should be, and I think eventually we will be. But I don't think we talk about the fair tax with Joe Rogan. I think we talk about, isn't it an interesting thing to look at getting rid of the income tax and get that going? Yeah, it would be interesting. Look at the effects it would create if we could find a way to get rid of the income. I mean, Rogan's the kind of guy, I believe, he's less policy driven than concept driven. So he looks at, oh, it would be interesting. All right, if I didn't have the income tax, then I wouldn't have to keep receipts and that and this, unless, but what would replace it? I mean, hopefully he would come to that, and you would say, well, if you don't have an income tax, are you going to get rid of the IRS too?
Mhm.
And if he says yes, which I think he would, then now you can go into what are the alternatives.
Right.
You can do a financial transactions tax, which simply says that every transaction that goes through the clearinghouses, you levy a tax, 1%, 1.5%, or whatever. You'll raise trillions of dollars that way. It'll all be hidden. It'll all go into the price that we pay because that's where ultimately the money comes from. But you can do it that way. That doesn't require an IRS. Frankly,
Mhm.
you have 2 or 3 people at Treasury that make sure that percentage is being levied, and that's it.
Yeah.
Or you go to something that is collected by other groups, like the tariffs. They're collected by customs. Or you go to something like a retail sales tax, which is collected by the states. There really aren't any alternatives if you're going to get rid of the IRS or something that does the same thing under a different name. It's still going to be needed to collect a value added tax, a flat income tax, any kind of gross receipts tax, okay? Because 90% of the business is done by people like Scarborough's business, smaller businesses that do it. They're not all going to be, oh, yeah, sure. Here's my gross receipts. Somebody just give you a check. He's going to say, well, my gross receipts really weren't gross receipts because I had this much uncollectible. And I had
Well,
this much refunded, or I had this much I didn't collect. Yeah, I'm on an accrual basis. Bob Paxton says he's going to advertise with me over a year, and I have to accrue that income, but Bob never paid. It's not really gross receipts. Who's going to adjudicate that? All right.
Exactly. Exactly. I have a question for
oh,
you. time we have left, Mr. Bob Paxton,
Oh,
timekeeper guy.
we're actually right a tick over already, so make it
Oh my
quick. I
gosh.
mean, we can go indefinitely long on the video. You'll just have to edit this for the radio station version.
Hey, Mr. Hayes, sir, put on your cap, your visionary thinking cap. HR 25 is now on the floor of the House for debate, and the everybody's thinking this is the greatest thing that will save us from that cliff that we've been talking about throughout the program. How much of it goes through as written, as presented, and if it's watered down through debate and amendments and things like that, will it be as effective as we see it in its pure form as HR 25 today?
Well, you never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you can get rid of the income tax and you can get rid of the Internal Revenue Service and concentrate on a consumption tax, the fact that they're going to try to make all purchases and prebates and all subject to some type of means test. In other words, Bob Scarborough makes too much money, so therefore he shouldn't pay 23%, he should pay 28%. And Bob Paxton makes even more money, so he should pay 33%.
Oh,
Right? And you look at that and you say, that's not the pure form. And we know what happens with luxury taxes and all.
Mhm.
But are we not still better off? Because Bob Paxton can decide what to spend.
I can't.
Bob Scarborough can decide what to spend. I can decide what to spend. I don't have to keep all those records. Look at how much money and effort you would save, Bob Scarborough, if you were not having to do the record keeping.
And
To me,
we've talked
that's a
about
huge benefit.
We've talked about that many times. Yes, we have. That's and the mental anguish that would be released into greater innovation
Right.
and growing business business that would serve the community better, more efficiently, and coming up with new ideas. That time is something that is something that a lot of people forget in a lot of ways as they make their daily plans. Time is. The time is worth something significant in the ability to reclaim some of it through the fair tax and releasing all of that compliance time into something more positive.
I think that again, it's hard to speculate. We know there are going to be a lot of changes. We know there's probably going to be a real push to get the prebate to where a family of four making 60 grand a year pay no tax. I've already been told that by one Democrat, that he would be more interested if it was something like that. So what does that do? That raises the amount the rest of us pay. There's going to be a push by some Republicans to increase it, the portion that goes to Social Security, to make Social Security even more solvent. There's going to be a push for a debt reduction portion by other Republicans and Democrats. In other words, 2% is going to go to pay toward the debt. Okay. A lot of those things are going to come into the bill, but I still think overall, if we can burn the records, so it makes it hard to get back in the game for the income tax and get rid of the Internal Revenue Service, even if we have to live with what we know will be complexity, we're still in a much better place than living with the income tax, because I choose by how much I spend. And my guess is they're going to say that it's okay for Steve Hayes to buy used goods and pay no tax, but Paxton and Scarborough, no.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to pay the sales tax because you're making too much money. Okay.
Oh, Marty, I can see some logistical problems in trying to figure out when you standing in the line at the cash register. If we're standing behind each other in the line at the cash register, how does that cashier know how much each of us make?
You're going to
That
have
was
a
it.
card with a stamp on it.
Oh,
Scarborough
okay.
is going to say he pays 33, Paxton pays 30, and Hayes pays 23.
That
And
ain't
then
fair.
somehow I've got somebody else's card because they're and the whole bag of evasion or fraud has now come back in time.
I'm just saying it'll be electronic.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well,
And they'll do that. But I don't know exactly how it would work, but I do know that those are the kind of things that have been tossed around back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. When I used to be on panels debating this with economists, these are kind of things that were tossed around. So they're not going anywhere. These are still going to be very, very much, and they're only going to be looked at if Trump is able to sell getting rid of the income tax.
well, let's hope he does. And I tell you what, it has been a fascinating discussion to this point. Our video audience has already gotten a fairly well extended version of FAIRtax Power Radio for this week. Mr. Scarborough's going to have to get out his editing pencil and decide how we're going to make this fit into the radio time slot. But that is going to be all we have for this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Steve, again, thank you so much for taking your time out to talk to us. Go out and convince that television guy you're going to talk to a bit later that he needs to get on with us and help us support the FAIRtax and help us spread the word.
I'm planning on doing that. Every one of these interviews I do, that's my goal. Thanks very much, Bob and Bob. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
All righty. Well, let's say that is going to wrap up FAIRtax Power Radio for this edition. Thank you so much for tuning in, sharing the video. That helps a lot. If you got a question or comment, just leave it below. We'll see it and might even respond to it on the air. Who knows? But until we meet again, that's going to wrap it up. That's Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
We are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
You'll demand it.
So tell me, how could I pay less taxes?
Less.
Yeah, I'm trying to get ahead, so how can I pay less?
Well, I suppose you could pay less taxes by earning less money, or you could give to charity.
How is that going to help?
Actually, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but if you know the right people, okay, or if you have a really good lawyer, you can usually get around the big ones.
If I may, under the fair tax, to pay less taxes, you would simply consume less. You would control how much you pay and when you pay your taxes simply by choosing what you purchase and when you purchase something.
So I could stay focused and get ahead.
Exactly.